Well, hello, ninth graders from Trinity. Welcome to the last installment of your confirmation online. Would have been our last meeting. That's what we experienced last week. Our last confirmation meeting with you all. Hard to believe, but we are very much looking forward to the weekend where we'll see many of you for the confirmation worship celebration. And we're looking forward to seeing the rest of you when the time is proper and everybody's out of quarantine, and you'll have a good group to celebrate as well. So I promise we'll do it upright both times. As far as our last time together, we wanted to be sure we were going to get in kind of our last words as we send you off. The wise advice for you to take forward and think back on. So we're calling it, Nate is going to hold it up, dun, 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 dun. The Confirmation Break 8. It's not a summary of your whole faith in general, but it's just some things that if you keep in mind, it'll help you keep moving forward as you continue on this next chapter of your faith journey. So, you want to say a few things before I keep talking, Nate?
Well, looking forward to seeing you tomorrow if you can make it to the practice. 10 o'clock, Ridge Run Park, the west entrance. That's the one off Scenic Drive. If you can make it, please do. It'll just be easier. You know, people, if you don't go to practice, you show up on Sunday and then you worry.
You'll be like the person who's in the wedding party that doesn't get to the rehearsal and don't know where to stand and don't know what to do, and they're all freaked out. So we don't want freaked out.
You used the word meeting a little bit earlier.
Yes.
Speaking of meetings,
if I look, I'm looking the wrong way. Okay,
speaking of meetings, well, if you haven't had a meeting with Pastor Christy and I,
oh, that's right.
You got to let us know, right? Because we got to make that happen before the confirmation service, all right? 15, 20 minutes. Don't worry about it, right? You should know by now, right? We're just going to sit and talk. But if you have not had it, send us a note, text message, email, call. But we need to somehow connect, whether it's virtually or socially distanced and masked in person. There we go.
All right. So here we go. The Great Confirmation Grade 8 Countdown. Number 1. You always remember, God is always with, and it should say God is always with you. God is always with all of us. Confirmation is an affirmation of your baptism. At your baptism, God promised. God did all the work at your baptism, really. And God promised that no matter what mistakes you made along the way, no matter what kind of a person you were growing up into, you were claimed as a child of God, and God promised that God would always be there with you to help forgive you and pick you up and set you on the right path when we fall. Also to guide us along the way, to give us people to walk with us, but we're never deserted. Even in times like this, where we see all kinds of bad stuff happening, it's sometimes hard to recognize God. When we feel like our life is falling apart, we're more likely to say, God, how could you let this happen? How could you desert me? But the promise of baptism that will hold forever from that day on, whether you're confirmed or not, but since you're going, you got to be even stronger in that, is that God is always with us. Sometimes you have to look, and sometimes it takes a while to see it. And sometimes the more you do it, the better you get at doing it. And to give you a little object lesson as to how that kind of works, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to give you a link to the website that has it. But this is a little optical illusion. And the trick is, and it'll tell you on the link too, You're going to stare at it for like 30 seconds, maybe a minute. You're going to stare at it. And then you're going to shut your eyes, not really tight, but just gently shut your eyes and kind of turn your head toward a light. And then you're going to see what happens. I'll tell you, what happens is you see the outline of Jesus floating, kind of wherever you look. And it's a reminder that, you know, in everyday life, sometimes you have to trust the promise and look hard. But the more you practice looking to find God, the more likely you are to be able to do it and draw the strength that comes from that. That's it. Number one.
All right, number two.
Dun, da, da, da.
We follow Jesus. All right. Jesus is God's example of how we should live, how we should love the world, how we should deal with the world and interact with the world, right? And we follow Jesus. It's kind of like looking at the world, looking at everything through your Jesus glasses, right? You see what's going on. You ask yourself, you know, what did Jesus do, right? What did Jesus do in a situation like this? How did he treat people in a situation like this? And that's what you use to make your decision. And when sometimes you're hearing different stories from different places, right? So whether it's in school, whether it's in a church, whether there's some preacher telling it to you, right? If whatever it is, you listen to it and then you look at it through Jesus' example. Does that make sense given what I know about the way God loves us, the example Jesus set? And you always follow Jesus' example. You know, think about it. There are churches that'll tell you, oh, you don't think the way I think, so you're going to hell. You don't love the right kind of person, so God doesn't love you, right? There are churches that'll tell you that. But what do? We look at Jesus' example. Did Jesus ever tell anyone, you're not welcome here? No. Did he ever tell anyone, sorry, you're from the wrong country, you speak the wrong language,
Hang around with the
wrong people, you got to go. I don't want to deal with you. Did he ever? No, right? You look at everything through Jesus' example, and that's how you decide. Jesus is kind of like, I was going to say kind of like a compass. I don't know if you guys even know what a compass is anymore.
You can show them a compass.
But, you know, kind of like, can you see it? Oh, too bright. Kind of like a GPS, right? It's like Google directions. You know what? We follow Jesus because that shows us where we should be going, right? Where we should be heading. And if we're not, well, it tells us how to get back on track. Number two.
Okay, I'm going to add one more thing to number two. Just because, and Nate said it too, we've all said it, Jesus is our example and we follow it, the what would Jesus do? But you really have to read the Gospels, the four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. That's where you're going to find the stories of Jesus and how Jesus taught. That's what we have to go by. And it's not going to be as easy as it sounds, because nowhere in the stories of Jesus are you going to find, what does God want me to do when everyone is picking on this kid in front of their locker? What does Jesus want me to do when all my friends are saying, let's break this rule or that rule, we're going to have to go with what we understand of Jesus to make those choices. So if you haven't done it yet, I know we're not confirming a bunch of biblical scholars, but if you haven't gotten a really good grasp of the stories of Jesus yet, now would be a really good time to start. Okay, done. Number three.
Number three. God is at work.
God is at work, okay? Whether we see it or not, God is at work. You look around, it kind of goes with number one, kind of the same idea. You look around, it may look like God has fallen down on the job, but little by little, you notice, God works in small doses. That's wrong. Let me say it right. The way God works is over a long period of time. And so, because God is infinite. So we like to see things in our lifetime, which is really small. But I want you to think more of a lot of the games you know. Think about Jenga. Think about, any of those games where you pile stuff on and until finally you pile one more thing and it spills everywhere. There's about 8 different varieties of that kind of a game. But the idea is that God is working. Even if you don't see it, it's happening. So let's see. I'm trying to think if it's going to come up again. Is this the plan part or is that further down? This is plan, right?
This is plan. Make
Okay.
this plan. This will be plan.
Sorry about that. I'm hoping I'm not jumping ahead to a different one. I should have reviewed first the order of these. But what I
That's
showed
okay.
everybody, and you've seen it before, right? I'm going to hold this up. I'm going to say, what is this a picture of? And if you look carefully, sometimes people say, well, I think there's a boat in there somewhere. Maybe that's the best they can come out of a vague picture. But then if I turn it around, it becomes, be sure you can see it, picture of Noah's Ark, right? It's a picture of one of the stories from the Bible we have that talk about how God is saving the world. God saved all of creation at the great flood. On that note, we're praying for everybody who's suffering the great flood tonight as we speak down in Louisiana and Texas, because they're terrifying. But this is the story that says, God is making this happen. God is the one that takes all these individual frayed little threads and weaves them together, whether they're colored, whether they're just the black and white ones, to make the salvation plan work. And the truth is that oftentimes our lives, I'll even be generous, I'll pick a nice blue color. Our lives look like just one of these little threads. Here, I'll put it up behind a white piece of paper. There, you can see it. Looks like just a little blue thread. Doesn't look like it's much part of a plan, but God uses it to help save the world. So God is working through us and around us and in history and everywhere else. So even when it doesn't look like it, God is working. All right.
Number 4. Faith is not a solo act. All right? Faith is not a solo act. When it comes to faith, right, we're meant to connect, right? Think about it. We each live different lives. We have different experiences. We experience the world differently. We experience God differently. And so by coming together, right, we can share those different experiences, those different ways of seeing God at work in the world. And, maybe get a different view, a different perspective, a different understanding of how God works. It's like, if you think about, remember the optical illusions, right? You might look at it and see one thing. The person next to you looks at it, sees another. And you can't see what they're talking about until they point it out to you. But once they do, oh, it's obvious, right? I see the faces. I see the goblet now. And so that's the way faith is supposed to work. We connect, we share our experiences, our perspectives, and that helps us all to see God, to see the world in different ways. It's like in the Bible, they talk about the body of Christ. And they talk about how the church is like a body. You think of a body, you got eyes, you got ears, you got toes, you got nose holes, you got, hair, some more than others. And, but it's not like any one piece, part of the body is more important than the other. You know, for a body to do what it needs to do, you need all the parts, even though they're all different. Think of the story about the six blind men and the elephant, right? The blind men went to the elephant, and one blind man grabs the trunk. And he says, oh, an elephant is like a big snake. And another one grabs the elephant around the leg and goes, no, an elephant is like a tree trunk. Another one grabs the ear and says, an elephant is like a big fan. You know, well, they're all right, kind of. They're all wrong, kind of. But by putting all the pieces together, well, they can describe an elephant. So faith is not a solo act.
All righty. Let's see what this mysterious number that I probably forgot is. If it says God has a plan, I'm going to have to do some repeating. Yeah. Oh, can't tell by that. Oh, there we go. What you do matters. It may not seem like it. This goes right back to that same thing I said about the plan and how God works. Each of us has our part to play. We all have the different gifts. We all have the different talents. You guys have seen that. But for better or worse, or for even if we don't do anything, what we do matters. Here's the image for you, and I'll put a link. I will put a link up so you can kind of get a picture of how it works. But if you've ever played with dominoes and you line them all up, and the best thing about dominoes is knocking them over and watching how something that starts way, way over maybe to your right can travel all the way, out of your sight to somewhere else. And, before that last domino falls. The idea that everything we do adds just a little bit to the world. It adds a little bit to God's work. God can use what we do to make things better. Sometimes what we do can make things worse. Often, if we don't do anything, that keeps, if the domino just sits there, when another one hits it, down it goes. But it is for better or worse. Sometimes we can really affect the world by doing something. For instance, if you've ever been in a situation, so you're sitting around a cafeteria table with a bunch of your friends and they start saying really bad stuff about somebody. That happens way more than it should. And whether you like the person or not, if suddenly amidst all the talking about it, one person says, somebody once really said a lot of bad things about me too, and I'm just not comfortable doing this. I don't want any part of this. And, either gets up and walks away or just kind of pushes back and disengages. There are two outcomes. Yes, there's the obvious one that all their friends could gang up on them and say, blah, 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 how can you be so weird and whatever. But the other thing that can happen, and often does, is when one person sticks their neck out and says something like that, another person who's been wanting to say something but not quite brave enough to be the one to speak up, it gives them the strength to do it too. Things can change. We'll go right back to the dominoes. If all those dominoes are falling, if you pick about 3 pieces out of the way, it's going to fall and get to that place, and then it's going to end. It's not going to keep going. What we do matters. I was amazed in a bunch of our youth trips. We've been to Washington, D.C., either passing through it or as a destination. And whenever we can, we go through the Holocaust Museum, the National Holocaust Museum in D.C. And of all the things it teaches, and of all the experiences and the things that are a part of it, they sum it all up with little posters and little bands around your wrist and that say, what you do matters. You know, speak out against injustices. Speak out when you see something wrong. Don't become a part of it. You know, make things change, because what you do, even if it seems like nothing, matters. Dun, da, da, da.
Number 6. God can use you, right? So God can use you to heal the world. I'm getting all like pointy. And
You gotta put in the
God can use you to heal the world just the way you are, right? Just the way you are. How many times have you thought, how many times have people said, well, I have to be old. I have to be older to do something. I have to be older, smarter, cooler, stronger, you know, I need to be better, you know, I'm not good enough. All of those excuses that everyone gives. And you don't mean anything bad by it, but it's because you don't realize that just the way you are right now, there's someone who needs you just the way you are right now. And God can use you just the way you are right now to heal the world.
Right. Number 7.
Oh, man.
That's you.
Number 7. Confirmation vows are active, not passive, right? The vows you're going to make, they're all action, right? You're going to promise to live, to hear, to proclaim, to serve, to strive, right? They all involve doing something. You know, we look at the example of Jesus. He didn't start his ministry by walking up into the mountains, stay there for 3 years, come down and get crucified. Everything we know about Jesus, right? He wandered. He talked to people. He taught people. He told stories to people, right? He shared meals with people. He, you know, parables, miracles. It's Jesus' example was all about doing something. They were all active. And the vows you're making, they're active too. And if you notice, there is no time limit. It doesn't, you know, you're not promising to do something for 2 years, or you're not promising to do it once I get out of high school or once I get a job, right? There is no time limit. It starts now. And every day you make those promises again, and sometimes you'll fail, right? So I didn't strive for peace and justice, and I didn't proclaim the good news, right? But we know, right? That's all right in that tomorrow morning I can, right? I can start over again and I can do it. So confirmation vows, they're all active. And last,
All right, number 8.
believe it or not, this peeling off is going much better than it did last night.
Yeah. So Nate already alluded to it. You know, as we've been talking to you, I don't want any of you all to freak out. It sounds like, oh my gosh, I've got to know exactly, you know, I've got to know what Jesus would do. I've got to do what Jesus would do. I've got to speak up when it's uncomfortable. I've got to take stands when I'm not sure. How am I possibly going to be able to do that? And, you know, Nate kind of said it right at the end of what he said for those active vows. The idea that, you know, we are going to mess up. Now, I alluded to it too. We don't always know what Jesus would do. It's a guess. And remember, our stories of Jesus are based on the stories people shared and told about Jesus. It's not like he's right in front of us that we can actually follow. Sometimes, you know, our vision gets obscured and we have a hard time knowing what the right thing to do is. So this could have been the first thing you need to remember, but it can also be, it's appropriate that it's also the last word. And the last word, you know, if you need a image, I will, you know, give you the link to watch it on YouTube, but it's from The Lion King. A lot of you who went through First Communion or for through children's ministry here, have seen it used already. But it's where Mufasa is talking to Simba and saying, you are so much more than what you have become. And saying that, yeah, we make lots of mistakes, but the trick is there's grace for that. Tomorrow is another day. It's a new chance. The last word is we have our entire lifetime to learn how to do this right. And it may take us a while to learn how to do this right, but we're called, to at least work with God, work with the Spirit, try again, and do better. Growth is, what's really good for that. My image for you, right? We have it all over. We have a caterpillar. I've shared this. This is like the big Easter message too, but, caterpillar. It goes along and it's doing just fine, eating leaves and doing what caterpillars do. And, then all of a sudden, it feels like its life is ending. And as painful as that is, right? All of a sudden, the next phase, and it looks dead. It looks like it's all over. If you see them dried up and hanging on things, if you didn't know better, you would think it was dead. But we do know better. We know what comes next is that out of this ugly little gray thing, all of a sudden, starts emerging, right? Butterfly. If you've ever wondered why it is that the butterfly is a big Christian image, big Christian symbol, it's because it reminds us that even when we feel like our life is over, whether it's physically over or whether a dream has died or whether someone we love has left our lives, all of those things that make it feel like death, even if it's not physical death. But out of that, God is able to bring new life. That's what grace is. It doesn't make bad stuff good. It doesn't make you glad, like, oh, gee, I'm really glad this horrible car accident happened that changed my dream of being an NFL player. It doesn't make that good. But as you find new ways to go on, it gives you the freedom. The quote, "There's grace for that," just reminds us of one of the speakers we heard at one of our youth gatherings, who talked about a time that, that he had been very, very much involved in his faith, had kind of had some bad things happen, had some serious self-doubt, went to talk to the pastor about it. He heard that this young man had been cutting, had been considering, killing himself, the various things like that. And that one pastor's response, and so you can't always trust the pastor.
And so, hence rule number 2.
Right. You follow Jesus, not what some arbitrary pastor or even one that says necessarily if it conflicts. Because he looked at this hurting young man who had done so much and, grown so much in his faith and said, heard he had been cutting and had, this very dim view of his life, and the pastor said, "You're going to hell." And it hurt him a lot. And it turns out, that for many years he kind of had lost his faith and didn't know where to turn. When he finally went back through a different way into a different church, talked to the pastor there. He said, she shared 4 words too that changed his life back, and that is, there's grace for that. Any mistakes we make, anywhere we fall short, yes, there's grace for that, whatever that is. So anytime you feel like you've screwed up so badly, or you're so far off the track, or you've gotten so lost, you're never too lost for God to find you, which goes back to number 1. God is always with you. And it's never too late to try to start again. As long as you're still alive, there's always tomorrow, and there's a chance to move forward and a new beginning. I'll post links to some of the stuff we've been talking about so you can see the actual stories or the actual clips that we're talking about speakers. But I would encourage you, keep those 8 things in mind, because it'll help as you navigate your way through this next chapter that lasts, it's the chapter that begins all the chapters of the rest of your life in your faith journey with God. But congratulations for coming this far, for asking questions, and for growing this much. For those of you that are going to be confirmed this weekend, we're looking forward to it. For those of you that are doing it a little bit later, we're looking forward to that just as much. So we're going to miss seeing y'all on Wednesday nights, because the day will come that it's not all we're not all virtual.
But
There you go.
once, right, you're confirmed, right? After Sunday, you're confirmed. And even if you're not part of that group, if you have to go on, right? Now you're part of the high school group. So you'll be hearing about what we have going on there. Turns out the end of the month, we've got a little high school Halloween outing planned. So keep a lookout for that. Make a point of coming along, and if you're worried about showing up and who's going to be there, talk to 2 other friends and bring,
The 3 of you come.
then the 3 of you come. Okay, so confirmation isn't the end. It's just
New chapter. All right. We'll be looking forward to seeing you as the page turns. You guys take care. Bye-bye.
See you down the road.